Hello and welcome to my show, Shuvra Deb with you, with me, your host, Shuvra Deb. In this show, I will be discussing mental health with the aim of raising mental health awareness in our community and in society as a whole. The genesis of the show is my own pivotal life-changing experience of being in a Category 5 hurricane back in 2017. That experience led me to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. I am hosting this show in order to let you know that you are not alone if something life-changing has happened to you from which you are struggling to heal. Shuvra Deb with you focuses on a range of topics relevant to mental health and to raising awareness of issues surrounding mental health. Hello everyone and welcome back to my show, Shuvra Deb with you. I have been on a short break from the show, soaking in and enjoying the festivities of Christmas and the New Year period. I hope that you've all had a chance to rest and recharge over the last few weeks and that you're now hitting the ground running in the new year. And if on the other hand, you're still feeling a bit sluggish and struggling to get into the new year, I totally empathize with that. I think I gave myself so much space to rest, unwind, eat and drink that I'm still struggling a little bit with getting back into my daily practices and routines. But oh well, these things happen. I enjoyed the break, the rest and the change of scenery from my laptop and from the inside of my gym. And I know it will all fall back into place soon enough. As my regular listeners will know, the aim of my show is to raise awareness around the issue of mental health. And it's my way of inviting us all to take care of ourselves and of each other by looking out for our own mental health and the mental health of those around us. Whilst this show is about mental health awareness, I want to state at the outset that I'm not a mental health professional and I am not medically qualified. Therefore, nothing I say should be taken as professional advice. If you need someone to talk to, then please reach out to a friend or to a professional mental health service provider. Here in the Cayman Islands, Infinite Mind Care provides counselling services and can be reached on 926-0882. The Alex Panton Foundation offers support for people up to the age of 30, and their website is alexpantonfoundation.ky. Loud Silent Voices also provides mental health support. They can be reached on 922-3847 and their email is info@lsv.support. On my last show, which went out just before Christmas, I spoke about setting our intentions. I said that with the new year of 2023 being just around the corner as it was then, that the period of Christmas and New Year's was the perfect time to set any intentions that we may have for ourselves for the new year. In that show, I talked about how, in order to get to the bigger goals, we do this by setting smaller step-by-step goals for ourselves so that we're not taking on too much in one go. And as we start the process of committing to our intentions and taking those small steps towards achieving our goals, it's immensely helpful to have regular weekly or monthly check-ins with ourselves to see how we're getting on. For those of us who did set our intentions, and even if we didn't, the new year is a great time, I feel generally, to explore the topic of change and how we may embrace change. Whether that's a change in situation of our choosing, or whether it's a change in our lives that has come about as a result of external circumstances over which we might feel we have no control, or whether it's a change that we feel we have to make. So with that in mind, my show today is called Embracing Change. On today's show, I am going to talk about how to deal with change when it's unwelcome, how to embrace change when it is our choice, when we should maybe be inviting in change, and when we feel we have no choice other than to make a break for it and change something in our lives. I first want to look at change from the perspective of when it is forced upon us. For example, we are dumped by a love interest, made redundant from a job, served notice by a landlord, or we have our kids grow up and move out of the family home. When those kind of changes happen, our natural and instinctive reaction might be to resist and to wish as hard as we can wish that things aren't happening as they are, and to want everything back to how it used to be. The best personal example of this that I have relates back to my experience of Hurricane Irma. Irma struck some 14 months after I had moved to the British Virgin Islands. That move was my first time away from what I had called home for over 30 years, the UK. It took me a while to adjust to my new life in the BVI, and it took me longer, around 6 months, to love my new life. Notwithstanding that adjustment phase, by the time Irma came along, I had grown to love, and I mean love, living in the BVI. I loved everything about it, my friendships, my home, my lifestyle. And so when, without any real warning, the whole dream came to a crashing end, I was completely devastated. As a result, I struggled to let go of what had been and could not embrace what was the now. I struggled to move on, and that led to depression. Living in and hankering for the past caused me to be depressed. Not being able to find my way back to the BVI caused me anxiety. Worrying about the future was causing me to suffer anxiety. And all of that was going on in the context of suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder as I was back then. In those initial stages, those initial months after Hurricane Irma, I expended a lot of energy on being angry and regretful and resentful about no longer being in the BVI. I was resisting the change that was upon me, and I could not accept the finality of that change. But you see, the problem with resisting change as it happens, the problem with resisting the flows and the ups and downs of life, is that that resistance only makes life harder and more stressful. And that resistance only gets us stuck where we are even more. By resisting the change, by wanting to be back in our past, we become stuck in this almost no man's land where we find ourselves unable to live in the present because we are fixated on the past. And by not living in the present, we don't allow ourselves to experience our lives, and we don't allow ourselves to move into the future. After all, the present is what makes the future. So where something has happened in our lives that is causing there to be a change of circumstance that we did not plan or that we do not welcome, there are a number of ways to deal with this kind of situation. Firstly, and this is perhaps the most difficult one to do, firstly, we need to accept the inevitability of the change. Without allowing the energy to move through us and to move forward, we remain stuck. We remain stuck in sadness, regret, wanting something that no longer is. But getting to the point of acceptance and then movement are difficult steps to take. Rather than becoming fixated on needing to accept the change in a vacuum, as with many other things, by taking small steps towards that acceptance, we pace ourselves and allow ourselves small bite-sized ways of coming to accept the change. One of the ways in which we can do this is to maintain parts of our old routine, our old or pre-existing habits that are already in our lives, as this will help us to navigate and ground into the new situation and give us comfort from something familiar being present in our lives. For me, that routine, that familiarity lay in exercise. Whilst living in the BVI, I regularly went to the CrossFit box there, called CrossFit Castaway 1. As luck would have it, when I moved to the next place after the hurricane, Guernsey, which is in the Channel Islands, just south of the UK, my buddies who operated the BVI CrossFit box had just opened another gym right there in Guernsey. I was so thrilled that that continuity was there, especially in those early months. So, what I did was I started going to CrossFit classes in Guernsey to CrossFit Castaway 2. By maintaining the habit and routine of something familiar from my previous life before the unwelcome change came about, by following the same routine as much as I could, I was able to start grounding myself just a little by taking comfort in the familiar. And of course, getting back into exercise was a great way to help with the PTSD and the depression and the anxiety. Another way to accept and even start to embrace a change that is unwelcome is to see if there are positives that we can find in the change. Now, I love eating, and I love food, and I love good quality wine. For those of my listeners who have visited Guernsey or even lived there, you will know that it is a paradise for food and wine lovers. In my mind, the island has some of the best and most consistently good food of any global destination. So, not long after moving there, in fact, from my first night there, I started to discover that Guernsey is a foodie's mecca. In spite of myself, and in spite of how much I missed the BVI still, I was loving the restaurants and the bars that Guernsey had to offer. By being able to embrace that aspect of my new life, by seeing the positive parts of my new life, it was slightly easier to start to accept the change. A further way to start to embrace change, especially when it is unwelcome, is to try to start seeing the opportunity in the change. And that is quite often the key to moving forward. And if seeing opportunity in the change is still just too painful, I invite you to try taking a step back from seeing the current struggles in your life as being your life. Instead, try to look at your circumstances objectively and from a distance. Imagine that your life, the change that has been forced upon you, is in fact something that is happening to someone else. Imagine that these changes are happening to a friend. Then imagine that your friend is struggling with these changes in circumstance. Once you've started to look at the situation objectively from a distance and as if it was happening to your friend, try to find just one aspect of this situation where you can see an opportunity or where you can find the potential for an opportunity. And then speak to yourself about that opportunity in the more objective way that you may speak to a friend about the same situation if it was happening to them. Post-Hurricane Irma, whilst I was in Guernsey, I saw the value in my new friendships, in the new friends I was making. I saw the value in meeting these wonderful new people who were all so kind and embracing towards me, especially in light of what I'd been through in the BVI. There were, however, other opportunities that were in my life that unfortunately for me at the time I kind of missed, as in I missed realizing that these were opportunities. And I missed seeing those aspects of my life as opportunities because I had allowed myself to become stuck in missing my old life, a life that was no longer accessible to me. So at the time, I failed to see the opportunity in the change. One of those opportunities was to work at the law firm where I worked for a while, and where I met some great people with whom I'm still friends, and I got to do some really interesting work that I hadn't really done before. I had a great boss, and he taught me things that I wouldn't otherwise have learnt. And if you are still struggling to see the opportunity in the change, then I invite you to look back at a previous time in your life when something happened that at the time you wish had not happened. Then, look back at how that situation may have been the catalyst for something great, some kind of unexpected development in your life for which you are now so grateful. For me, that situation was over 10 years ago and came in the form of being dumped by a guy I was really into at the time. I was feeling so sorry for myself one evening. A friend and work colleague at the time, seeing how sad I was, suggested that we get a team together and cycle from London to Brighton. Brighton being a coastal town around 70 miles from London in the UK. And that's a distance of around 115 kilometres. I thought the idea was ludicrous. But of course, everyone else in the group agreed that we should do this. And, again, in spite of myself, I felt buoyed along by everybody else's enthusiasm and ended up saying yes. The most hilarious part of all of this was that I hadn't cycled since I was 13 years old. And at that point in time, I was about 28 or 29. And perhaps even more hilarious was the fact that I didn't even own a bike, let alone a road bike, which I was told is what I would need. At the time, I had no real idea of what any of this meant. There was a lot of chat that evening about road bikes and hybrids, to which I was quietly smiling and nodding, having not a real clue what anyone was on about. The Monday after the Friday on which I had agreed to this craziness, I rather thought that everybody else in the group would have forgotten all about it, and in case they had remembered, I lay low, and I most certainly didn't go raising this cycling from London to Brighton business with anyone. Then, within days, an email landed in my inbox telling me I was part of this team of 5 of us who were cycling from London to Brighton in about 4 or 5 months. Oh dear, I thought. Oh dear. It was too late to back out, too late to pretend I couldn't remember what we had talked about, what I had agreed to sign up to. So, off I went. I went to Evans Cycles, which is one of the biggest bicycle retailers in the United Kingdom. I found a store assistant, told him I didn't have a clue what I was doing and please could he help me. I soon came to learn that this wasn't the first time the guy in the store had had someone totally clueless coming in and asking for a bike. So that gave me some comfort. And he was great. I walked out the store with a bike, a few pieces of kit, including padded shorts and a couple of jerseys, shoes with cleats on them, a pair of socks, and I think a pair of shock-absorbing gloves for my hands. And after a bit of tuition and training, I made it from London to Brighton. I even made it up the really steep hill on the way to Brighton that I'd been so terrified of. Then, on a different ride, I made it from London to Paris over the course of 4 days. And on other different rides, I made it around the 160-kilometre ride London course 3 years in a row. So, being dumped by a guy, my friend catching me feeling sad about it, and inviting me on a seemingly innocuous team bike ride, led me to pursue a completely new hobby, have a fitter and healthier lifestyle, and gave me so much unparalleled joy for the years that I road cycled back in England, Wales, and mainland Europe. Whilst I didn't see the opportunity at the time in this relationship coming to an end, in hindsight, that situation of change provided a wonderful opportunity and catalyst for change that I had not embraced or seen at the time in the form of my newfound passion for road cycling. Another way of embracing change is to take the focus off the change. Instead, when we switch our perspective and note the things for which we are grateful, our spirit starts to lift immediately. By being grateful for the things we have in our lives, we open up space to welcome in more of those good things. By not focusing on the negative aspects of the change, and instead by being thankful for the positive aspects of our life, we are activating abundance. I spoke about activating abundance on my 3rd show called Finding Your True Purpose. By activate abundance, what I mean is that we get ourselves into an abundance mindset, as opposed to being in a scarcity mindset. When we are faced with a situation where a change has been forced upon us, it is all too easy to see the lack and the negativity of the situation. I know this all too well, with all the time I spent dwelling on wishing I had my old life back in the BVI after Hurricane Irma. Instead of focusing on the loss, I invite you to show up for yourself and to have an abundance mindset, to activate abundance. Activating abundance is almost a rewiring of our brains. The human brain hasn't quite caught up with modern life yet. And the way in which that's relevant for abundance activation, where the human brain hasn't quite caught up, is this. Our brains are hardwired, preloaded if you like, to keep us alive, to fight the saber-toothed cat or whatever animal or situation that as prehistoric mammals we would be fighting against or dealing with in order to stay alive. The result of this is that the brain is hardwired to look for negative things in order to activate survival mode, in order to keep us alive. Now, translating that into the modern world, we instinctively look for the negative in almost every situation, and it's kind of not our fault. We're made this way. On the other hand, you may already be activating abundance, and you may already have an abundance mindset. If you're someone who is grateful for what they already have and you don't resent others' successes, in fact, if you actively celebrate other people's successes and achievements whilst being grateful for what you have, then you are already activating abundance in your life. Another sign that you are in a state of abundance is that you help others, whether that's by giving your time to a worthwhile cause or giving your time to a friend, or whether that's by giving away some of your belongings which you consider you no longer need. By giving of ourselves, we believe that there is enough to go around, and we are not stuck in the opposite of an abundance mindset, being a scarcity mindset. So, how do we get there? How do we activate abundance? The main call to action in my mind is to practice gratitude, to be grateful for what is already in our lives. Whether that's by actively making lists for things for which we are grateful, or whether it's by noticing the simple things in life and smiling at them. And when faced with a situation of change that has been forced upon us, noticing the very simple things in life is often the easiest thing to do to get on track with activating abundance. For example, noticing the morning light as it dapples on the trees outside your home. Seeing a butterfly flutter past as you go about your daily business. Or seeing and appreciating the big smile of your friend or lover when they see you. All of these seemingly small things do add up to make the bigger things. All these apparently small things form the richness and texture to a life. And I invite us all to have gratitude for all these so-called small things in our lives. If something has happened to you that has left you a little bit in shock, perhaps, or if something has happened that you would rather not openly have to tell people who may ask you about it, then you might want to consider having a pre-prepared story to tell. Have a version of the event that you will tell people that you are willing to share with people. A bit like having a press release. After all, you are the author of your own life, so I invite you to feel able to have a press release about your life if that helps you to navigate an unwelcome change. I wish I had followed this part of my own advice after Hurricane Irma. As I discussed on my first show, Hurricane to Healing, I would sometimes find myself in situations where it was either known that I had survived this big storm, or Irma came up in conversation, and for some reason I felt compelled to say that I'd survived that storm that everyone was talking about, that storm they'd all read about or seen the news about on TV. And then I would hear the questions. Was it scary? Did you think you would die? What was it like? And so on. And I would get a tight feeling in my chest. That tight feeling would rise up to my throat. My throat would close over. My heart would beat just a little bit too fast for comfort, and then eventually start pounding in my chest. My throat would go dry. My mouth would go dry. The questions, the voices, and all the surrounding sounds would become muffled inside my head, all blending into one, creating this vortex of muffled voices, a vortex of panic. And I physically felt that I had pins and needles inside my head. And there I was, quietly having a panic attack in front of people, in public. When, in hindsight, had I not been suffering from PTSD, had I had the presence of mind to predetermine how I would deal with this kind of situation, I may have gone ahead and pre-created a stock answer, my very own press release, something I could have said to people which would answer their questions, questions that I would be able to answer without losing myself to a panic attack. When there has been a situation where there is change which is unwelcome, one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is to be kind to ourselves, to give ourselves time and space to come to terms with this new situation. And there are a number of ways that we can do this. It may be that we need to grieve for something that we have lost, whether it's a relationship, a job, a home, a friend. Allowing ourselves the time and space to grieve that loss and to feel sad about that loss is so important. Without confronting and dealing with those feelings, we simply won't move on. We will end up burying those feelings. And when we do that, those feelings of grief, of sadness, anger, will likely rear their heads down the line, and quite often when we least expect those feelings to pop up, catching us off guard. Another thing that we can do is to take quiet moments to ourselves, to meditate or to have a yoga practice, or to take time to go to the gym and have a daily or a weekly workout. It's in those quiet moments that we allow our consciousness to expand. And by allowing that expansion, we quieten our minds and move away from overthinking. Eckhart Tolle says, when you become conscious of these brief spaces in thought as they happen naturally, those spaces will lengthen. And as they do, you will experience with increasing frequency the joy of perceiving with little or no interference of thinking. As I said in my second show, Standing Still to Move Forward, Archimedes famously had his eureka moment whilst relaxing and taking a bath. In that act of taking a regular bath, Archimedes was so inspired that he worked out the scientific principles behind what makes an object sink or float. Isaac Newton was famously sitting under a tree when he saw an apple hit the ground. From this, he was inspired to name gravity. So, how does this apply to a situation of change? Change offers the opportunity for something new to come into our lives. Taking my Hurricane Irma example again, if it hadn't been for that experience, if I hadn't been pushed to leaving the British Virgin Islands, if I hadn't found myself living in various different places, I would not have met the mentors and healers that I met, who ultimately helped me to start my healing and my spiritual journeys, which ultimately led me to where I am now. And I am so grateful to be exactly where I am right now. So, by giving ourselves time and space to get used to the change we might be facing, by being open to the new things coming into our lives, we move towards acceptance of that change, and we allow the new energies that come with that change to flow into our lives. Embracing change, where the change is through choice, is usually less difficult to navigate than when the change has been forced upon us. However, change through choice can still feel uncomfortable. And it can feel uncomfortable because we are getting ourselves out of our comfort zone and we are stepping into the unknown. Embracing change, when the change is through choice, can be scary, exciting but also scary. But you see, that fear element is not necessarily a bad thing. Our instinctive human fear reaction has a purpose. It is there for our survival. Fear is there to keep us alive. It's been there since the days of the saber-toothed cats and since the days of hunting in order that we could eat and survive. So it really is no bad thing at all. As modern-day humans, we can embrace that fear reaction. Whilst most of us don't have wild animals that we need to make sure don't eat us, the fear reaction can still serve its purpose for us. We can turn fear on its head. We can use fear as a catalyst to action. What I mean by this is rather than allowing any fear we may feel, rather than allowing that fear to debilitate us, rather than allowing that fear to prevent us from taking action, from taking the next step, we can use that fear reaction to identify what aspects of the imminent change are causing us to be fearful or anxious. For example, if we are changing jobs, we may feel anxious or fearful about whether we will like the job, whether we will get on with our colleagues, whether they will like us. All of these types of anxieties can crop up when changing jobs or moving to a new town, for example. The saying that fear, F-E-A-R, is an acronym for false evidence appearing real is not only true, but actually a really helpful approach for tackling situations that are making us feel fearful or anxious. What we can do with fear is that we can identify where the fear is coming from, identify what's causing the fear, and then by doing that, we are more than halfway towards getting rid of that fear or anxiety. We are closer to turning the fear on its head and using it as a springboard for the next step we need to take, whatever that next step might be. Let's take moving house as an example. The process of moving house can feel scary and overwhelming. If you're anything like me, you're great at accumulating stuff. So, come the task of packing up and moving house, you may actually be terrified. I know that I have been actually terrified of moving house in the past. So what can we do to help ourselves tackle this sense of overwhelm? When I first moved offshore nearly 7 years ago now, I had around 10 years worth of accumulated items, mostly books from my English degree. The way I dealt with this was I went into each room in my apartment. There were only 2 tiny rooms, but still somehow a lot of stuff. I looked around and I made lists, categorizing items into what they were and then subcategorizing what was going with me, what was going into storage, what was going to charity, and what was simply so unrequired it was going to trash. For me, by committing these lists to paper, I was able to see things set out in front of me in black and white, and that gave me a sense of security that I knew where I was with everything. I felt less like I was drowning in a sea of overwhelm and more like I was taking charge, taking back control. But the most daunting thing is starting the task. And more often than not, I have found that once I've started the task, I'm so much better at dealing with it. Taking that first step of identifying what the task is and then actually starting it is more often than not the springboard to action. Action which flows from having taken that first step. Action which allows us to conquer any fear. Another example of a daunting situation which can cause fear, but which also feels better once the task is commenced, is starting a new project. For example, starting a book or starting to write a business plan. If you're in a situation of change where you are starting a new business, for example, you're going to need a business plan. Starting that business plan can be daunting, especially if you've not created one before. There are so many online tools available to help with this. Forbes.com, in its article, How to Write a Business Plan, the 2023 guide, provides structure and breakdown that we can follow in creating a business plan. The Forbes article suggests that we need to have an executive summary, which is a description of the basic facts of the business and which will form the pitch for the business that we will make to potential investors or collaborators. The article says that the executive summary should communicate the business name, what products or services are being sold, and which marketplace is being targeted. Staying with the business plan example, the second thing to do is to create a company description. This should expand on the executive summary. The Forbes article says that this is the place to put information like the corporate structure of the business, which includes the legal setup. For example, whether the business is a limited company or whether it's a partnership. You'll also want to set out the ownership stake and details of that here too. And when creating your business plan, you will need to have a section for the financial information, including turnover and profit and goals and projections, and where these goals and particularly projections come from, on what they are based. You'll also need a section for operating costs and for any other costs. In a situation where you've never drafted a business plan before, all of this can be extremely daunting. So I invite you to use one of the many online templates and guides that are available in the first instance, and then make those your own. The online template doesn't have to be the final version of the business plan or whatever the project is that you'll go to market with, that you'll present to the outside world. But that first version of the plan, of the project, will form a great starting point from which you can edit and move towards your final version. And of course, this does apply to anything, to projects, to any form of change. Any kind of change in all circumstances requires an element of discipline. In fact, sometimes it requires a great deal of discipline. In order to be able to embrace a situation of change, in order to be able to make the most out of a change in our lives, we need discipline. There's a great little write-up on a website called hackspirit.com setting out a number of traits that we can consider adopting in order to be more disciplined. The first trait is having a system, and that system needs to be personal to you. So you've just been made redundant and you want to find another job. Decide what kind of job you want, at what level, with which type of company, at what salary point. Then commit to sitting down and sending off, for example, 10 applications a day, or commit to working on sending applications for 3 hours a day. I used the example of writing a book on my last show when setting our intentions. If your intention is to write a book and you've never written one before, then most likely you'll need to make some changes in your life to bring this book to life. Commit to writing, say, 1,000 or 2,000 words a day, or to drafting 4 or 6 pages a day. Or if you work better to set periods of time, promise yourself that you'll write for 3 or 4 hours each day. And once you've made that commitment, Don't make excuses to get out of it. Be disciplined and stick to the self-made promise, the promise that you've made yourself. After all, if we can't keep the promises we make to ourselves, how can we expect ourselves to keep promises we make to other people, to the people we love and care about? The hackspirit.com article says that another trait we may wish to adopt in order to be disciplined is to not rely on motivation, which may sound counterintuitive. After all, if we're not motivated, how are we going to get things done? Motivation is a thing of beauty and something that I think we should all try to feel when we commit to big things, such as a new job or a new relationship or anything that's a big part of our lives. But the flip side of all of that is that, yes, we're all human. We're not always going to be motivated. We're all going to have our meh days. We're all going to have our days when we can't be bothered to show up. And we're all going to have days when we're feeling tired and irritable. But one of the keys to success is to keep showing up anyway. This applies to many situations and in the context of dealing with change, especially when we're in a situation where we're feeling overwhelmed or fearful. By showing up to do the task that we need to do, we are keeping ourselves going and we are tackling the change, even if it is for an hour on an off day. Another tool to embracing change is to see the changes and to have clear goals around them. If you have chosen, for example, to change jobs, change careers even, then having clear goals around this will help better inform your next steps and why you are taking those steps. As I discussed on my last show, if we would like to see changes in our health and we want to improve our health, having clear goals of what we want and how we will get there makes the change much more manageable. Rather than committing to losing weight in a vacuum, for example, having a clear set of steps towards achieving that goal will make it much easier to accomplish. For example, we might want to try committing to going to the gym 3 to 4 times a week if we already go 2 to 3 times a week. Another example is to commit to a healthy, nutritious eating plan that fits in with our lifestyle, which we will find easy to stick to. If the change situation requires us to get something done by a certain time, for example, moving house, then a great way to stay ahead of the game is to set ourselves a fake deadline. This can also work for completing a project or presentation. That could be setting ourselves a fake deadline in terms of the actual date by which the thing has to be completed. Or it could be allowing ourselves only, say, 3 hours in which to get the kitchen packed up and ready to go. It's amazing how when we give ourselves 10 hours to do something, chances are it will take the full 10 hours. On the other hand, if we give ourselves 3 hours to do the very same thing, chances are we will find a way of getting everything done in that 3 hours that we have restricted ourselves to. As part of this show on embracing change, I want to discuss some of the things that we maybe should be inviting ourselves to change in 2023. Some of the things I invite us to change in 2023. And the reason I invite us to make changes goes back to something I've discussed on past shows, which is that without change we become stuck. Our energies become stuck and we stop creating and manifesting new things. For example, if we stay in the same job our whole lives, for decades perhaps, we may be cutting ourselves off from learning new skills or from meeting new people. We may become bored and we may lose our enthusiasm. We may lose our enthusiasm for the job, and if that happens, we're doing ourselves and the company a great disservice. On the other hand, you may be flying and very happy in the same job. You're already enthusiastic and you're regularly bringing new things to the table, in which case, keep going. If, however, we are feeling like we're stuck in a rut, like we need some fresh inspiration, a great way of breaking that chain of gloom is to travel if we can. By traveling and exploring a different country, a new culture, different foods, we are opening up our minds and changing our perspectives. By meeting people from new cultures and countries, we start to appreciate that people view often the same things in many different and varied ways, which, if not anything else, provides an interesting cultural education. Now, whilst I am a total advocate of having a regular routine, of having regular practices, If we feel like we need some change in our lives, if we're feeling like we're stuck in a rut, then changing our routines can help to get us out of that rut. For example, if you're a jogger or runner or cyclist and you have a regular route that you take, try changing up your route and going to a different place if you're able to do so, and it's safe to do so depending on where you live. If you go to the gym only to do cardio sessions, try doing some weight and resistance sessions in addition to your usual cardio. You'll be doing something else, something new, and likely you'll see a change in your fitness and in your body shape, all of which is super cool and fun. Another great way of inviting in change and getting out of a rut is to take up a new hobby. If you used to enjoy arts and crafts as a kid at school, why not take that up again as an adult? Or if you liked creative writing at school, try your hand at writing a novella or a full-on novel. The same goes with poetry. Slightly nuanced from all of this is where you may be feeling an actual heavy sense of dissatisfaction. You may be feeling stuck, knowing in your heart or in your gut that an aspect of your present situation is not suiting or serving you anymore. Knowing and feeling that you need something more or something different in whatever aspect of your life that might be in is often the first step to taking steps to making a change. Feeling that you simply cannot carry on as things are, whether that's the job you're in, the house you live in, the country you live in, knowing and feeling that you can no longer carry on as you are is often a sign of needing change. There is, of course, a fine line between having the type of attitude where you may consider that someone is never happy, where you hand someone the moon on a stick with a $10 million check attached to it and they're still complaining about what they don't have. No, there's a difference between not seeing the positive in a situation, taking a negative viewpoint, and of a situation of knowing and feeling in the pit of your stomach or in your heart that the situation you are in just doesn't suit you any longer. Being able to recognize that difference is key in deciding initially whether to make a change or whether to adjust our outlook as regards the situation and to start seeing things with more of a positive and constructive attitude. On my 9th show, Show 9, Self-Care, Costa Rica and Retreats, I spoke about the retreat I went on in November last year to Costa Rica. I went to Blue Spirit, Costa Rica, and I went on a retreat led by Paul Selig. Paul is a psychic, teacher, and award-winning author. During one of our sessions, Paul said something that has really stuck with me. Something that we can use in our day-to-day lives when we are unsure about something. When we are unsure about something, such as whether we know something or whether we feel something. He said this so much more eloquently than I will, but I will have a go. The idea is that in order to see the difference between whether we are in a knowing state or whether we are in a feeling state, is to imagine back to a time when we knew for a fact about something. For example, what we had for last night's dinner. Do that now and then ask yourself how that feels. Imagine back to what you had for last night's dinner. What you feel about it is probably that it just is. You know that you had, let's say, curry for dinner last night, and there's not much more to it than that. Then, think back to a time when you really felt something. That first kiss with a lover. The moment your baby was born, the moment you found out you were pregnant, the moment you learnt that your wife or girlfriend was pregnant with your child, the moment you graduated college. Now, how did it feel to be back in those moments? Bet it was different, huh? So, the difference between knowing and really knowing, feeling something, can be demonstrated by how those two different situations feel in our gut. The knowing of what you had for dinner versus the knowing of the depths of feeling at that first kiss, the graduation, the knowledge of the incoming baby. For me, when I have that kind of feeling knowing, as opposed to the factual knowing of what I had for dinner, I feel the feeling knowing in my heart, and sometimes I feel it in my stomach. Sometimes both if it's a really powerful feeling of knowing. So, back to the situation that you're not sure about. Are you stuck and need a change? Or are you feeling all glass half empty and want to try switching up your perspective before making any drastic changes? It may be a combination of both. But a good start to sensing into which one it is to feel into the situation and see what comes up for you. See, sense, and feel how and where you feel. And if in your heart or your gut or both, you know that something needs to change, then start the process. Start to make that change. And once you have committed to making that change, your head might start to spin a bit. The thought of quitting your job and doing something else, as long as you have the resources to do so, of course. Please don't do anything drastic that will cause you harm. Or the thought of moving house, the thought of moving country, all that will likely have your head in a complete spin. So what are the common thoughts that stop us from embracing this kind of change? What are the common blocks that nearly all of us get when we're trying to make a change, even when we've chosen that path of change? Some of those blocking thoughts are, I don't have the money, or I don't have the time, or it will never work out, or my family and friends will criticize me and they won't support me and I will be all alone. So let's deal with each of these. We can take the first two of these blocking thoughts together. I don't have the money and I don't have the time. The way to deal with each of these is to ask ourselves, are they actually true? And if not having enough money is in fact true, because for example, we are living paycheck to paycheck, then a side hustle is the way to go. Don't quit your job and not be able to pay your bills. Instead, find the time, make the time to start a side hustle. And if you're struggling to find the time, go back to my 15-minute rule about which I spoke on show 2, Standing Still to Move Forward. Take just 15 minutes a day and commit that time to a project, whether it's writing down your business plan, drafting your business idea, or getting down on paper the structure of the book you're writing. And then if you're really serious about the side hustle, if you really want to make that change, expand your 15 minutes a day to 1 hour a day, then to evenings, then to weekends and public holidays. Start turning down invitations to things. Stay in your own space and bash out your project. And if you're worried that your friends will forget all about you, your true friends can go without seeing you for even 5 years or more and still want to hang out with you and be able to pick up exactly where you left off. So don't worry about that. And if your family and work commitments really make it impossible for you to find your time for the side hustle, take your vacation time and use those. Use those 20, 25 or 30 days in the year to get a start on your side hustle. Who knows? Your side hustle may in a few years turn into the best passive income, better than anything you'd imagined. And then you'll be open to taking vacation almost whenever you want. But you have to dream big and you have to commit in order for any of this to happen. And you have to believe that it will happen. And once you get into that state of mind, once you get into that state of flow, you will find that you have more energy. Those old days when you were so tired after a day in the office, all you wanted to do was sit on the couch and eat potato chips. That will be a thing of the past. You will start to feel energized by your own passion, your commitment to yourself. That will give you the energy to make more and more commitments to yourself. And you're going to create that side hustle and you are going to fly. And if you don't, what's the worst that happens? You tried something. You learned new skills. You discovered that you are more than just your job. You are more than your role as a father, a mother, a daughter, son, friend, work colleague. And you gave yourself a shot at doing something. And if this first side hustle doesn't work out for whatever reason, I can almost guarantee to you that by having put out the energies that you put out, that you want a side hustle, by teaching yourself those new skills, by showing yourself you can commit to something outside of the ordinary, months, maybe even years down the line, a different side hustle or even a main hustle will happen for you. You just got to keep plugging away at it and it will happen. Staying with the blocking thought of I don't have the money. If on the other hand, you have, say, a couple of $1 million tucked away in your bank account, maybe take that leap. You'll have a nice little nest egg to fall back on, come what may. And having that buffer will give you the mental space, the freedom, the energetic space to really focus and take a serious shot at what it is that you actually want to achieve. So, the third block that we may be putting in our own way, stopping us from making that change, which we know in our gut, in our soul, has to be made. It will never work out. One of the most wonderful things about the uncertainty of life is that none of us really know anything. None of us can really know anything beyond what is in the present. Therefore, a foregone conclusion, such as it will never work out, is that true? No, of course it's not true. And it's not true because we don't know that it won't work out. However, by having a belief that it will or won't work out pushes that foregone conclusion along, allowing us to manifest what we believe. The false belief we may have come to cultivate of it will never work out is another way in which fear manifests itself. I talked about fear earlier and the ways we can use fear as a fuel to achievement. An article on Inc.com called "The Mental Exercise That Tony Robbins Uses to Overcome Fear" states that when Tony Robbins is hesitant about doing something that scares him, he imagines himself at age 85 sitting in his rocking chair and looking back on his life. Tony Robbins gives the example of wanting to learn to fly a helicopter. He says he sees himself when he's 85 years old, sitting in his rocking chair, most likely regretting missing out on the opportunity to fly the helicopter if he didn't at least try. The Inc.com article goes on to discuss the results of a research study undertaken about this. A 1994 study by Thomas Gilovich and Victoria Husted Medved proposed that while action prompts more regrets in the short term, inaction prompts more regrets in the long term. In other words, asking that guy on a date and getting laughed at might initially sting more than letting your chance to approach him pass by. But years later, when you're sitting in your rocking chair, you're more likely to regret letting him go and wondering what if than if you'd asked him and been humiliated. In this situation of asking someone out on a date, better to know it's a no from them than to spend any of our valuable time and energy wondering what if, right? So, translating this to making a change in our lives, to taking a step, maybe a leap of faith into the unknown. Outside of the fact that almost any action has an element of the unknown in its consequence, translating this to going outside of our comfort zone, when we're 85 years old, sitting in our rocking chair looking back at our lives, won't we regret more not having taken the chance and at least having tried so much more than we will regret trying and failing? And what we consider to be our worst failures often precede very closely our greatest successes. Abraham Lincoln is a wonderful example of this. Oxford Royale, a provider of summer schools to Oxford, Cambridge and Yale, has an article on its website saying the following about Lincoln. The USA's most famous president did not have a great start to his career. Until the age of 21, he worked on the family farm. At the age of 23, he announced his candidacy for election to the Illinois General Assembly. With the election some months away, he went to serve in the Illinois militia for the Black Hawk War, entering as a captain, being mustered in and out of service several times, and finishing as a private. Not a great sign of military success. When the election came around, he finished 8th of 13 candidates. His next move was to buy a small general store with a friend he had known from the war. The local economy was doing well, but Lincoln didn't prosper and eventually sold his share. It was only when he ran for office again 2 years later that he was successfully elected and saw success in his career only when he switched course and began to teach himself law in order to be admitted to the bar. So, sometimes in spite of those early failures, by keeping going, we may just hit the jackpot, or at least have a great deal of fun and learn new skills along the way whilst trying to succeed. And the final block that we may be putting up. My family and friends will criticize me and not support me, and I will be all alone. My reaction to that is, well, so what? It's your life to lead as you see fit. But being more compassionate towards that criticism from family and friends, the chances are that they might not be able to see what you can see in the change that you have chosen. They may be approaching your choice to do something from a different place, from a place of fear. And if that is the case, letting other people's fears get in the way is even worse than letting our own fears get the better of us. And as for being all alone, that's almost certainly not going to happen to you. Once we take steps to make changes we need to make in our lives, we will attract the right people into our lives. Like attracts like. The energy we put out is what we get back. So rather than being all alone, our true friends will always have our back no matter what. And on our journey of making changes in our life, we will make new friends along the way. And getting into community is so much easier now, probably than it has ever been before. By going on social media, we can almost immediately be a part of a group or groups along with other like-minded people. So, rounding up, I have talked about change today. Change in all sorts of different circumstances. Where the change is forced upon us due to events outside of our control, and how that can be difficult to come to terms with, and how we do come to terms with it. Change that we have chosen for ourselves. Areas in which I invite us all to make changes. And the situation where we feel deep down to our core that something in our life just has to change. If you got some useful tips and pointers from my show, I would love to hear your feedback. So please do get in touch. Email me at shuvradeb82@gmail.com. That's spelt SHUVRADEB82@gmail.com. If any of the topics I've discussed today have affected you, please do reach out to someone, whether that's a friend or a professional support service. Infinite Mind Care provides counselling services and can be reached on 926-0882. The Alex Panton Foundation offers support to people up to the age of 30, and their information is on alexpantonfoundation.ky. Loud Silent Voices provides mental health support, and their number is 922-3847, and their email is info@lsv.support. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be here on Bobo FM 89.1 every Thursday at 2 p.m. See you next time. Bye for now. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for listening to Shuvra Deb with you. And please do tune in every Thursday at 2 p.m. on Bobo FM 89.1 for more topics related to and relevant to mental health. If any of you would like to reach out to me directly about any of the issues I've discussed, please do email me at shuvradeb82@gmail.com. That's spelt SHUVRADEB, the numbers 82 @gmail.com. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening.